Hi there.
Hi, how are you?
I appreciate you taking the time to do this.
Oh, likewise. Thanks for your interest.
First of all, I'm just wondering, would it have been possible to do this documentary, or at least the way that you were able to, without all of this footage that very helpfully was recorded for you?
Yeah. It certainly would not have been as rich. I can say that. I mean, it's just one of many elements, I think, for me that, just made this such an enticing story and something that, I guess I've said this, but it just makes you salivate, as a documentary filmmaker. I mean, not only to have this story with so many layers and so many rich characters, but the fact that there's this trove of material that, was filmed by him in the process of doing these things is just enough to, you know, these things don't happen. They don't fall in your lap like this. It's just such an incredibly rare opportunity.
It's interesting. I had talked a few years ago to an FBI agent who said that generally speaking, bank robbers are idiots. The most people who rob banks, they just go in, they give somebody a note. There's not a whole lot of intelligence to it, and they're actually excited when they meet someone who is approaching this with some sort of brains. And certainly,
Right.
here's a guy. He was very smart. I mean, he was his incredibly sophisticated ways of approaching this.
Absolutely. I mean, I think, just in my research and just in learning about how he did some of these things, I mean, the level of ingenuity is just off the charts. And I mean, obviously, very nefarious goals in mind, but you just can't help, or I can't help, just being completely bewildered by what he came up with to pull off, these just extremely elaborate heists. I mean, they're just it's genius. And I think everybody, from the police watching him do it to his prosecutor to the judge. I mean, every single one just marvels at times. You kind of can't help but just kind of be taken aback by some of these things.
And it's interesting because, and I think maybe his mom mentions it at this one point, that he's such a smart guy. The fact that he decided to rob banks for a living is disappointing because he obviously could have done a lot of things and made a lot of money doing something else.
Absolutely. I mean, it's the tragedy of the whole story, really, that, I think he's a very peculiar person in a lot of ways. I think he has a lot of challenges, but he obviously has just an incredible mind for systems and for breaking them, frankly. But I think applied to especially in some kind of computer realm or something. I mean, who knows what he could have contributed to society. So that was always something that was just really fascinating for me is when exactly he got on that path, when he made that decision, and really what fueled him, through decades of just increasingly elaborate and more outlandish kind of heists and escapades. And really just what kind of kept driving him through that is just it's a marvel to think about for me.
Well, he certainly seems like he decided fairly early that this was the path he was going to take.
Absolutely. I mean, I spoke to someone who ultimately didn't end up going on camera, but a roommate of his from a boarding school when he was probably not even 10 years old. And this guy was telling me, they used to lie awake at night and he would say, no, I'm going to be a criminal mastermind. That he's been saying this stuff since he was, a preteen. It's just kind of like to set that goal. But for him, it's unnerving and unsettling. And frankly, just kind of you can't help but laugh a little bit to hear him say, well, obviously, everybody dreams of robbing banks. Like that's what you want to do when you're a kid. It's kind of like remember
Everybody
having
dreams, yeah, everybody dreams of being Lex Luthor. It's
yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. Right.
well, there are a lot of fascinating characters in this story. His, I guess, biological father is certainly a character. It's one of those people. I want his backstory because it seems like there was a lot going on there.
He's a story unto himself. I mean, such a surprise to me that, between Blanchard and his mother and a lot of the police officers, I mean, these are people that I've spent hours and hours, on the phone and person and just gotten to know very well over time. But I was always told that his biological father was, in the wind somewhere, that Blanchard had met him once, but it was kind of an awkward meeting. They didn't have much of a relationship, etc. Like nobody knew where he was. And then he just literally showed up to set one day. And he's this larger than life character who, have so many parallels with Blanchard. And it just kind of, really makes you wonder about some of this nature and nurture and what kind of makes you who you are and the goals you have. But yeah, I mean, just such a fascinating character and so much personal backstory and things that we couldn't get into in the film, of course, but yeah, worthy of more exploration for sure.
Yeah, it is an interesting question because he apparently didn't really have a relationship with his father, but man, their personalities seem like two sides of the same coin.
Absolutely, yeah. No, and it's so, yeah, it just truly is amazing. And I think having his mother on the other side of that, who obviously has been involved in his life day to day, from the very beginning, and is just such, gone out so far on a limb to try to protect him, to try to, kind of steer him in the right direction, or sort of has just a completely different relationship and a completely different view of him. I think just, yeah, it's very interesting to take such a complex character and kind of be able to see a bit of this, 360 and how he's kind of seen in different realms and where those drivers come from. So,
Well, it's interesting because early on, the interviews with people who knew him early seemed to talk about, well, he was a little insecure, he was trying to fit in, and trying to make it. But man, by the time he's an adult, uh, ego and self assurance is not an issue at all.
well, it is really, I mean, I think it's, again, it's so fascinating for me to just think about what drives this kind of behavior. And I do think that, there may have been some degree of financial incentive at the beginning, but I think it's pretty evident watching some of these videos that what he was really getting off on was impressing his friends and sort of building this, persona for himself, and this kind of recognition, almost, the way somebody in a Jackass episode or something would be, just to kind of like get a rise out of their friends. But he just embraced that in a way that, seems so uncommon, just set the trajectory for the rest of his life. And that, once it was no longer about the money, he just had this incredible obsession, and this drive with bettering himself, polishing his craft. But I think also, seeing how close he could fly to the sun in a lot of ways. I mean, it's hard for me to believe that he wasn't intentionally leaving some kind of breadcrumb trail just to, because he loved that thrill of the chase, that he wanted that recognition. He wanted somebody pursuing him and recognizing, how good he was at what he was doing.
Well, it's sort of an interesting journey for him in that, during his most successful years, it looks like he probably part of his effort was, I've got a team, but I'm always going to be the smartest person in the room.
Yeah.
He's going to be in control. And then he runs into the situation where he's dealing with this quote boss who he is in a subservient role with, and he doesn't have control. And it seems like for him, that's where everything starts to go psychologically unwound, is once he's not in a situation where he controls everything, he's just not as sure about what to do.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of a, it always sort of harkened to sort of a, you know, Goodfellas or kind of a casino or something, that it's sort of like, there's this great rise and fall naturally in the story. And I think he clearly got so out of his depths, going from, being kind of a rebellious teenager to being a sophisticated bank robber to, suddenly getting wrapped up with these, international crime syndicates that clearly have some much more nefarious intentions, that he truly lost control and really kind of spiraled out.
It's interesting. Like a lot of other smart people, he tends to make stupid mistakes where he makes a decision. You just think, I would not have made that much decision, much less this guy. And without giving anything away, toward the last teaser of this documentary, he makes a decision, and you think, what was he thinking? What yet?
Yeah, I mean, as one of the police officers says in the film, it's like, how can you be so smart and yet be so dumb? And you kind of see that over and over again. And it's not like, I don't, I'm sure there were mistakes made along the way. I think he loves to kind of go back and justify everything that he ever did. But I think something that's always eye-opening to me is that, he could spend a year just planning, down to the second of every, this perfect crime, to walk into a bank and walk out with $750,000. And then a week later, he's strapping smoke bombs to his chest and holding a circular saw to an ATM that's out in the middle of the street. It's like, clearly there's something else driving that to be so brazen, to almost stand out there and say, come try to catch me, like, I can outwit you, I can outsmart you. Like, he needed that thrill, that he needed that sense of the chase, I think.
Well, he certainly has the healthy ego, and I'm wondering how difficult it was to get him to agree to do this.
Not difficult at all.
That
It
was
was
that was my there were a couple of moments where he would get asked a question and he would just sort of laugh it off. But I mean, were there certain things that you just felt like he's not going to talk about this because it makes him look bad, or there's a crime out there that he doesn't want to discuss?
very few. I mean, he's always been very open and presumably honest with me, it seems. I mean, he's a very charismatic person, really, to sit in a room with. He's very unassuming, he's very polite in most contexts, and he's the type of person that'll sort of lean in and just be like, well, here's what really happened with that, and kind of reels you right in. Obviously there are a lot of different versions of these stories and things that turn out not to be true, and I think we, tried to roll that into the way we were telling the story and acknowledge some of that. But I think that there are, it's, by the same token, he clearly kind of has a bit of a dark streak. There are a lot of rumors and accusations and things that fly around him that, I was never able to verify one way or another, and things that kind of break that image that he's created. And it is very hard to know where the truth of some of that lies. I mean, obviously he has a way of, doing a little bit of revisionist history maybe, and kind of making it all part of his master plan, and this, kind of mythological figure that I think he wants to live up to. But yeah, it's complex to unravel all of that, for sure.
Well, at one point he does sort of laugh off the thought that he'd be dangerous. On the other hand, he says, "But I'm going to go and wreck whatever sort of havoc I can on anyone who crosses me," which, like you said, it sort of hints that there's a darker side to him that he just doesn't want to show.
I mean, yeah, for sure. I mean, that was very surprising to me when that came up. I had known him for quite a while, and I'd heard from, countless other sources that, he could be extremely vindictive, and people that were very, very intimidated by him, which was a little hard for me to believe because it wasn't a part of him that I'd ever seen. But it is like, in that one little glimpse of an instant, I mean, you just see a very different side of him that, could be unleashed, presumably. But as far as I know, I don't know that he's ever really been, a violent criminal. No one was ever, in my knowledge, truly hurt or killed in any of his crimes. And I think that's kind of part of what makes this intoxicating and kind of a fun watch.
Well, let me wrap it up this way. Has he had a chance to see this, or?
He did, just very recently, actually. And I think by and large, he was pretty happy with it.
Well, it certainly mostly makes him seem like a criminal mastermind, which I think was his whole idea. That's what he wanted to be.
Right. No, I mean, in so many ways, I think, the story is just about this quest for notoriety. And I mean, what better way to do that, I guess, than to have a film made about you and, chronicle all of your various misadventures. So certainly tried to balance that where we could, but it's, a lot of it's hard not to marvel at.
Well, I really enjoyed it a lot. It was a hell of a story, and I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me.
Well, thanks so much. I appreciate your interest.
All right. Thanks. You have a great day.
Thanks, you too.